This is a Pictures in Motion in Focus presentation.
The first public parlour to present projected moving pictures to a paying audience were the Lumiere brothers in December 1895 in Paris, France. Perth first witnessed this in 1896. Shortly after came locally produced footage, often of a sporting event, but later it manifest as promotional material, aimed at attracting an audience.
So wonderful to see everything moving, just as it really is. All the places, the chemist shop, Jacob Miller. Mrs. Potter. All the children out in Rockaby Road. Their whole life, just as it is.
A moving picture of the principal thoroughfares of the city will be taken today at 11 a.m, including views of Hay, Barrett and William Street, Rockaby Road, Subiaco, and St George's Terrace near the General Post Office. Come and be in the picture!
It was in 1907 that Leonard Corrick of the famed Corrick family of entertainers used a motion picture camera to record the candid camera scenes of Perth streets. These were shot, edited and screened in one day.
Leonard started making his own films, inviting the public to be in the picture. He shot street scenes in Perth in the morning with this bioscope camera, developing and screening it that night using this Pathé Frere projector.
This footage was first shown during the family performances at Queen's Hall in William Street, Perth, in March 1907. Shortly after this, the family started making and appearing in their own productions, designed to lure local audiences in whichever town the troupe was performing. As film and cinema historian Ina Bertrand has pointed out, the Corricks were consummate self-promoters. They acted in, and publicised, the family firm in their films, as can be seen in a short chase comedy, The Bashful Mr Brown, possibly the first narrative film made in Western Australia during 1907. The early history of our Western Australian film production endeavours has been recorded both in printed and documentary forms. First is the documentary film, The Distant Lens, made in 1979. This documentary is a Western Australian film treasure that is composed of photographs and archive film and looks at the past of Western Australia. It is narrated by Alan Castle with additional commentary by prominent members of Perth's acting community. Directed by Glenda Hambley. And produced by Paul Barron and Owen Patterson. With a script written by Glenda Hambley and David Rapsey. This 50-minute black and white documentary was made by the Perth Institute of Film and Television, which became the Film and Television Institute of Western Australia, FTI. The National Film and Sound Archive of Australia distributed the film. This historic documentary also takes the audience through a kaleidoscope of events, including 2 wars, royal visits, the group settlement, and the first aeroplane flights. So it is much more than a simple history of filmmaking. In December of 1985, the third History and Film Conference took place at the University of Western Australia. Meanwhile, an exhibition on film and television in Western Australia was conducted concurrently with that conference, called The Moving Image. This was staged in the Alexander Library building and attracted considerable attention. It was also in that year that the Alexander Library building was opened. Associated with the moving image display was the production of a booklet with the same title, to which the state film archivist Mr. Barry King made a major contribution, and which has significantly added to the literature about Western Australian film and television, for which few sources existed prior to this publication. Titled The Moving Image: The History of Film and Television in Western Australia 1896 to 1985, this booklet was edited by Tom O'Regan and Brian Shoesmith to coincide with an exhibition on film and television in Western Australia at the Alexander Library in Perth, WA. We are fortunate that television veteran and cinema technology enthusiast Richard Ashton has a copy of this important publication. In fact, Richard features in the publication. In The Moving Image, Ina Bertrand has a chapter on early WA film producers. This covers a number of topics we'll cover here. Ina Bertrand is one of the most prominent Australian film historians. She taught media studies at La Trobe University for 25 years, and wrote and/or edited several books and many articles during that time, mainly about Australian film and television history. In 1978, Ina Bertrand began research for a database that provides photographs and details about picture theatres and cinemas in Western Australia. This became known as the CinemaWeb Project, which in 2007 was offered to the Australian Museum of Motion Picture and Television, now known as Pictures in Motion Film and Television Museum. The generosity of the West Australian film pioneers had been inspirational. Many of them talked to Ina at length and allowed her to copy treasured photographs. Over 20 years, hundreds of people contributed, providing documents, images, and information. Fred Murphy was the state's leading professional filmmaker of the interwar years. He began his career by helping filmmaker and entrepreneur Stuart Booty with the filming of Busy Bee on the Perth to Fremantle Road in May 1914, before going on to make newsreels and promotional films, then produced dramatic narratives in the West, following an educational trip to Hollywood. Fred Murphy took over the movie film facilities of the Dease Photographic Studios in Perth during the early 1920s. Photographer Dennis Dease is not only remembered as a famed photographer, but also as a pioneering exhibitor of moving pictures in Perth. Dease established his studios in 1897, after acquiring a lease over the newly constructed Smith Chambers building at 117 Barrack Street. A 4-story building, the ground floor and part of the basement became the location of his first business. This building still survives today. Though the business relocated to 81 Barrack Street, where later the Liberty Theatre would be an upstairs neighbour. The business stayed there until 1972, when a fire at the Liberty Theatre destroyed the photographic equipment downstairs and caused the business to close. This very same cinema was first gutted by fire in February 1961, and for some reason, Liberty theatres across the globe had a habit of burning down. The Liberty Theatre in Fargo, USA, was destroyed by fire in 1924. The Liberty Theatre in Saxton, Pennsylvania, USA, was destroyed by fire in 1935. The Liberty Theatre, Melbourne, was damaged by fire in 1950. The Liberty Theatre in East Chattanooga, Tennessee, was destroyed by fire in the early 1960s. And the Liberty Theatre in Camas, Washington, was gutted by a fire in 1994. An interesting part of the Dennis Deese story is that he was a pioneer of moving picture exhibition as early as 1900. The Edison Company had developed its own movie projector, known as the projectoscope or projecting kinetoscope, in November 1896. Dennis Deese and a friend bought one, and on a hot summer night mounted it on the veranda of the Grand Hotel, located on the corner of Barrack and Murray Streets. From 1893 to 1910 it was called the Grand Hotel, then from 1911 to 1949 it was named the Hotel Perth. Across the road, in Murray Street, a screen was installed above a single-story shop. When it became dark, he projected a large image of a bullfight together with advertisements. People stood and stared, and the crowds grew, and the traffic stopped. The police went up onto the veranda and said he would have to stop the show. But he refused. He said he had contracts with his advertisers, and he had to go on. He was charged with obstructing traffic, but was later acquitted.
The local cinematographers did what work they could get, making advertisements and the occasional newsreel. But the best of them, Fred Murphy, tried to emulate the style of the Hollywood films. He'd passed through Hollywood on his way home from the war. He was immensely impressed. The equipment, the studios, the promotion was so sophisticated. Back in Perth, he made a number of dramas in a style that was already 10 years out of date.
Fred Murphy made a drama called Love's Own Luck in 1920, which he claimed to be the first acted picture made in Western Australia. Ian Stimson has in his collection a photo album that belonged to Fred Murphy. This album is identified as his first photo play. It includes scenes of Kenwick in the 1920s. Characters in a film were played by Athol Carris, James Herbert, Esme Gale, Nell Gale, Chonda Chester, and Conway Du Huygens. Fred Murphy was behind the movie camera. This was followed by a comedy called Twins and Trouble, made for the Ugly Men's philanthropic group. The Ugly Men were a major force in the cultural life of Perth in the 1920s. They were a band of voluntary workers. They operated the White City Amusement Park on the Perth foreshore between World War I and 1929. They also operated Uglyland in Fremantle between 1922 and 1936. Rita Farrell, in her honours thesis, tells of the Ugly Men's Association, who provided not only material relief from hardship, but also a great deal of amusements. Rita Farrell explains that they were concerned about the hardship caused by the absence or loss of male breadwinners as a result of Australia's involvement in World War I. The Ugly Men were involved in the production of this for-real comedy film in 1921, directed by Fred Murphy. This engendered a great deal of public enthusiasm and provided entertainment for adults and children alike. Another Fred Murphy comedy film was Dreams and Screams, made in 1923 for Sir Thomas Coombe, the owner of the Prince of Wales Theatre in Perth. It was first shown at the Prince of Wales in October 1923. The film starred the visiting ballerina Lydia Khan and visiting comedian Jack Kellaway. It's an early slapstick comedy, partly filmed in Queen's Gardens. Excerpts of this were shown in The Distant Lens. The Kellaway family were well known in the theatrical world and prominent in Australian films. Jack's brother Cecil Kellaway was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for both The Luck of the Irish and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. His brother Alec Kellaway became a notable actor in his own right, best known for his work in Australian theatre and film, notably playing a number of character roles for director Ken G. Hall at Cinesound. His other brother Leon became ballet master for Edouard Borovansky and the Australian Ballet. It's an early slapstick comedy, partly filmed in Queen's Gardens. Fred Murphy operated a film company called Westralian Films. He then moved to Victoria from 1924 to 1926, but returned in 1927. He joined the Metropolitan Water Board in 1930 and continued part-time work with film, including news items, making advertisements, etc. Fred Murphy died on the 3rd of October 1971, at 77 years of age. Sadly, there is no indication of where Fred was buried owing to that part of Karrakatta Cemetery being renewed. There was no disturbance to his remains interred below the surface. It just means that new graves will be located alongside the old graves, and within areas that were previously used as walkways. All memorials and markers, including the grave number, were removed. Much of our movie-making heritage was based away from the West, as Australian feature film production mainly evolved and was concentrated in the eastern states. Between 1906 and 1928, Australia made 150 narrative feature films, almost 90 of them between 1910 and 1912. Before then, a remarkable pioneering effort was Soldiers of the Cross, a multimedia production made in Melbourne by the Salvation Army. It premiered in 1900 and toured nationally and internationally until 1920. Historians consider Soldiers of the Cross to be a landmark in production, so far as development of the Australian film industry. This consisted of 3,000 feet of motion picture segments, some 200 photographic glass magic lantern slides, music and oration, where the slides were projected while the film reels were being changed. This was produced by the Melbourne-based Limelight Department's film studio, owned and operated by the Salvation Army. In its 19 years of operation, the Limelight Department produced about 300 films of various lengths, making it the largest film producer of its time. Soldiers of the Cross is considered to be the first important use of film for the portrayal of drama and a narrative story. Produced in Melbourne in 1906, the story of the Kelly Gang is regarded as the world's first feature-length film. The film was made just 26 years after Ned Kelly was hanged in 1880. On a budget of £1,000, the film earned £25,000 in profits, touring extensively in Australia, New Zealand, and England.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now present the story of the Kelly Gang, the longest film ever made.
When it opened on the 26th of December 1906. The story of the Kelly Gang was 6 reels long, or close to 60 minutes in duration. Audiences all over the country flocked to see this film, which stayed in distribution for most of the next 10 years. Almost 90 narrative feature films were made between 1910 and 1912. Then there was an official ban on bushranger films in 1912, which robbed the audience of a popular genre at that time. Until then, Australia was one of the most prolific film-producing countries. The beginning of World War I brought a temporary pause in filmmaking. Meanwhile, the prolific Australian film director, writer, producer and actor, Raymond Longford, formed a production team with Lottie Lyle to produce the silent film, The Sentimental Bloke, which was a hit when it opened in Melbourne Town Hall on the 4th of October 1919, breaking all existing box office records. With the suspension of local film production during the war, Australian cinema chains sought alternative products from the United States. Then by 1923, American films dominated the Australian market. In a tactic that is all too familiar in business, they flooded Australian picture theatres with cheap fare that the local industry couldn't compete with. In addition, independent producers merged under the umbrella of Australasian Films and Union Theatres, then formed something of a cartel. This paved the way for exclusive deals to be signed over the following decades, shutting local movies out of the picture theatres in favour of American films, which had already recouped their production costs at the United States box office. In the late 1920s, the introduction of the talkies cemented the American hold over Australian cinema, and by 1927, 90% of all films screened in Australia came from America.
Watch for the mail, I'll never fail. You don't get a letter and you know I'm in jail. Da, da, da. Don't cry today, don't cry. Ah! Goodbye today, I gotta bye.
Despite the 1927 Royal Commission into the moving picture industry in Australia, the Combine, run by Australian businessmen, had a far-reaching impact on the Australian feature film industry, which only recovered lost ground with government funding in the 1970s. In 1930, F.W. Thring, 1883 to 1936, established the FD Studios based in Melbourne to make talking films using optical sound equipment imported from the United States. During the 5 years of its existence, FD produced 9 features, over 80 shorts, and several stage productions. Ken G. Hall became a driving force in establishing Cinesound Productions in 1931. The company operated into the early 1940s, becoming Australia's leading domestic studio making feature films based on the Hollywood model. It was particularly successful with the On Our Selection series of comedies, started in 1932. Cinesound produced only 17 feature films, all but one of them directed by Ken Hall. Though financially successful, the company ceased making feature films following the 1939 outbreak of World War II. Kokoda Frontline, released in 1942, was directed by Ken G. Hall and won Australia's first Oscar. It was in March 1943 that the Australian newsreel called Kokoda Frontline, produced by Cinesound Review, shared the Academy Award for Best Documentary, in a tie with 3 other war documentaries.
This is happening less than 300 miles from Australia's coastline, half the distance from Sydney to Melbourne. Men are sweating, suffering, dying in that jungle, so that it cannot happen here. Are they getting all the support they deserve from the mines, from the factories, from the ordinary civilian? Can every man and woman in this country truthfully say, I've done all I can, given all I can?
I've seen the war, and I know what your husbands, your sweethearts and brothers are going through. If only everybody in Australia could realise that this country is in peril, that the Japanese are a well-equipped and dangerous enemy, we might forget about the trivial things and go ahead with the job of licking them.
As well as winning Australia's first Oscar, Kokoda Front Line. Remains the only newsreel from any country to have ever won an Academy Award. This newsreel was shot by acclaimed war photographer Damien Pera, and detailed the triumphs and struggles of Australian troops from the 39th Battalion, fighting Japanese forces in Papua New Guinea during the Second World War. Sadly, on the 17th of September 1944, Pera was killed by a Japanese machine gunner. He was reported to have been walking backwards behind a tank to capture the expression in soldiers' eyes as they went into action. He was buried in Ambourne War Cemetery and mentioned in dispatches. His wife survived him. Their son was born in the following year. Chips Rafferty and Peter Finch became prominent international stars of the period. It was Charles Chauvel who cast Tasmanian-born Errol Flynn in a leading role in 1933 in The Wake of the Bounty, before he went on to a celebrated Hollywood career. Chauvel directed a number of successful Australian films, including 1944's World War II classic, The Rats of Tobruk, which starred Peter Finch and Chips Rafferty.
Charles Chauvel, maker of 40,000 Horsemen, now brings the epic heroism of Tobruk and Kokoda Trail to the screen in a blaze of undying glory. The Rats of Tobruk is matchless, blood-stirring entertainment, alive with action. Courage! Rats of Tobruk is enacted by the perfect cast, headed by Grant Taylor as Bluey, Peter Finch as Peter, Chips Rafferty as Milo, Pauline Garrick as Kate, famous comedian George Wallace as the Barber of Tobruk. The imperishable deeds of the Rats of Tobruk, from choking desert sands to the jungle swamps of New Guinea, the one great picture every Australian will see with deep national pride.
His last feature film was Jeddah in 1955, which was notable as the first Australian film shot in colour, and was entered in the Cannes Film Festival. Jeddah won more international attention than previous Australian films during a time when Hollywood films were dominating the Australian cinema. Chauvel was nominated for the Golden Palm Award in the 1955 Cannes Film Festival, but lost to Delbert Man for Marty.
Marty, oh Marty.
Harry!
Marty.
All men belong to tribe. Point bone at me. They see me dead. I die soon. You're going.
Rubbish talk. No one can make you die. Tell me, why man talk?
I die soon.
If you die, what I do? I not know this country. How I find bush food, chaka. I die too.
You die. Good. Then Manjinga happy fella. Manjinga say you wrong skin for me. If you die, Manjinga happy. Maybe not seen me die. If you die, good. That's good. Good. You die.
You mad fellow.
Yes.
Mad fellow. No. 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 Please. No.
Good eye, brother. Good eye.
A number of cinematographers were prominent in Western Australia, though most often were engaged in news gathering and documentary making, rather than movie making. One most active in this profession was Leith Goodall, who started work in Kalgoorlie as a projectionist's assistant in 1917. He then came to Perth and worked for the next 20 years for Hoyts, becoming theatre manager and chief projectionist. In the 30s, he was a cameraman for Fox Movie Tone News. During the Second World War, he was senior projectionist for Hoyts and ran the Ambassadors Theatre. In the 1940s, he was a partner and cameraman with Southern Cross Films Limited.
Yeah, Dad set up Southern Cross Films when he was a projectionist at the Mayfair Theaterette, which was in Hay Street. He did this for about 12 months. The pictures were shot by Dad. They were sent across to Herschel's labs in Melbourne, I believe. They would write a script and somebody in Melbourne would record the narration and it would be married together, and then the print would come back a week or so later and then it would be screened in the cinema, and the Theaterette. There was all sorts of things. The opening day of the Royal Show, and there was regattas in Crawley, and the Governor-General opening, this, that, and the other. Relevant stuff for Western Australia. And for 12 months it was the first and the only local newsreel.
In 1952, Leith joined the WA Education Department's film unit and continued to produce documentaries and promotion programs for WA state government departments and the WA Tourist Bureau. It was with this unit that he would work with Darryl Binning and Alex McPhee Sr. Alex McPhee Jr. would later work with Leith's eldest son Peter Goodall at TVW Channel 7, with Peter being an inaugural member of the Australian Museum of Motion Picture and Television, and a member of the Western Australian branch of the Australian Cinematographers Society, like his father. Peter's brother Michael started in television with The Competition, WA's second commercial television station, SDW Channel 9, working in the film department, and as the official stills photographer, before venturing into news camera work too. Later, he was a cameraman in the newsroom at TVW from 1971 to 2003, continuing the Goodall family tradition. Michael Goodall covered the transition from film to electronic news gathering, whilst Peter also used electronic news gathering equipment on his move to the ABC in Perth. There was a time when all three were working for different television stations in Perth at the same time. Peter was with TVW Channel 7, Michael was with SDW Channel 9, and Father Leith was stringing for ABW Channel 2. Leith Goodall retired in 1968 and sadly passed away on October 16, 1978. Sydney, Melbourne, the Gold Coast and Adelaide currently have movie studios which are heavily utilised, whereas Perth has been slow to build world-class facilities.
Why can't we do something here in Western Australia? It's always been a thought of mine that Western Australia, Los Angeles. Western Australia has beautiful weather like Los Angeles and is absolutely a wonderful place for which to set up a film industry, and I've been trying to do that for years and am still trying. Anyway, after a lot of messing about, we finally got in touch with Mr. John McCallum. His group was called Fauna Films. They made Skippy and Barrier Reef and a couple of things like that. But we got in touch with them, and this was the height of the nickel boom in Australia, and after a lot of discussion, it was decided that we should try and make a movie in Western Australia surrounding the nickel boom. And so that was the start of the film that became Nickel Queen.
The Nickel Queen was made in Western Australia in 1971 and is considered to be the first colour and sound feature movie to come out of the West, though the creative talent and key stars were not from WA. It was directed by John McCallum, who also was one of the screenwriters and producers. After appearing in many films together, the Australian-born John McCallum married the English entertainer Googie Withers in 1948.
There was a crowd of enthusiastic fans outside St George's, Hanover Square, for the wedding of John McCallum, the Australian film star, and his bride, the gifted English actress Googie Withers. It wasn't a very nice day for the wedding. Perhaps they'd banked on it not always raining on Saturday. But nobody seemed to take any notice of the weather. Both bride and groom looked extremely happy as they left the church. I'm sure all of us would like to echo the scores of sincere good wishes which were obviously being pressed on this popular couple as they drove away to the reception.
They had 2 daughters, Joanna and Amanda, and a son, Nicholas.
London, and arriving at St George's, Hanover Square, film star Googie Withers brings her 4-month-old daughter to be christened. With her Australian-born actor husband John McCallum, Googie sets a charming example of how to combine a screen career with a happy family life.
Joanna went on to appear in The Nickel Queen with her mother. Googie Withers was a dancer and actress with a lengthy career spanning some 9 decades in theatre, film, and television. She was a well-known actress and star of British films during the Second World War and post-war years. John McCallum was a theatre and film actor, highly successful in the United Kingdom during the 1940s and 1950s. He was also a television producer.
Getting involved in movies is, you have to see to believe, of course, and John McCallum and his people swept into the place, and they are experts, of course, at getting whatever they can at the lowest cost, and the lowest cost for them is nothing. We had very good association with the state government, and I think Charles Court, Sir Charles Court then was Development Minister, and he gave us every help. They wrote this story about Nickel Queen, a woman who was up in the Nickel area, actually northwest of Kalgoorlie, and that's where most of the film was shot. Apart from the fact that McCallum was very intent on getting things as cheaply as he could, and so he agreed to a couple of things. One, to put several people in the movie, and to use their swimming pools and things like that for various shots. And the second one was, which caused us untold problems, everyone he saw, he said, "We'll send you tickets to the opening night." As it happens, by the time opening night came about, if everyone had got a ticket, we'd have filled Subiaco Oval, which holds 45,000 people. The state government provided enormous facilities, particularly up in the outback, and the film was made. We put in 150,000, the Fauna Films people put in 150,000, and the remaining 200,000 was raised from local investors. We suggested that they should put in Premier David Brand in a scene, and also that they should put in the Development Minister Sir Charles Court, give them small parts somewhere, which they did with great glee, of course.
What's it like being known as the Nickel Queen?
Well, I think it's a bit bloody stupid.
Is this live or taped?
Live.
Oh, that's great. And I warned you she could be pretty rough.
She's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I love her.
Excuse me, Mrs. Blake. The Premier and 2 cabinet members have arrived. I'd like to introduce you. Excuse me. Excuse me, Sir David. May I introduce Mrs. Meg Blake?
How do you do, Mrs. Blake?
How do you do?
I've read about your remarkable nickel find.
Oh.
Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you.
I'd like you to meet the Minister for Industrial Development, the Honourable Charles Court. You've certainly made Spinifex Hill famous.
Oh.
And the Minister for Mines, the Honourable Arthur Griffin. How do you do, Mrs. Blake?
How do you do?
We then had a nightclub scene. This is one of the most incredible things I think that I've come across. We had a nightclub scene in Parmelia Hotel in Perth, and people were invited to come along, and would you believe we paid them $10 each. gave them dinner, but they had to buy their own drinks, and they provided the complete set for the nightclub scenes.
Look at that, will you? They call that dancing, wriggling about like a lot of bloody caterpillars. Who's the old bag with the big boobs?
That's Lady Bartholomew. The wife of Sir Henry Bartholomew, that's Sir Henry.
They go for this title bit, don't they? I'll have to see if I can wangle one myself.
Another glass of champagne?
Let's have another bottle.
Why not?
The Broad Arrow Tavern substituted for the pub in the movie. Ross Lightfoot, a Goldfields pastoralist and prominent local citizen, who became a federal MP, is seen here as a thirsty miner who is in need of a drink.
Okay, in you go. But you can't be half as thirsty as I am. You might let a man to the bloody bar. Come on, Mary. I've just driven nearly 300 miles and I want a beer now.
Me too.
Hey, Mary.
Poseidon's hit 200.
You bloody...
Prominent Western Australian actors Eileen Colocott, Maury Ogden, and Doug Farley had roles, as did media personalities John Hudson and Rick Rogers. A hopeful John McCallum was interviewed by Sid Donovan prior to the Perth premiere.
John, you've just returned from an extensive trip overseas, England, America, Germany, Hong Kong, and you're very optimistic that this film is going to sell well overseas.
Yes, I am. I think we've got a very good chance. I spoke about it to British Lion, to the Rank distributors, and to distributors in America, and they're all very interested and want to see a print. Now, we've rushed one through, as you know, for Perth, because this is our important opening here. But once it's on here, then we're getting prints to England and America. I'm going back in May, and I think with the interest aroused already, I think we'll get a very good release, world release for this film.
Why, in particular, are they interested in this film?
Well, initially we made it because of the interest in mining in Western Australia. Poseidon, when I was in London about a year ago, was front page news. Not financial page, but front page. It was in New York too. Now, Western Australia has been known throughout the world through the nickel finds here. We've made a film about nickel. It's as simple as that. I think it's an entertaining film. I think it's good family, general entertainment, and we'll find out tomorrow night. But if it's as good as we think it is, we will sell this film all over the world, which is very important for Perth and Western Australia.
John, the premiere of the film here tomorrow night, the first ever in Perth for a colour feature full-length movie made in Western Australia. Now, if you haven't seen a premiere, you've missed something awfully important, haven't you?
Well, that's right, you have, and I'm looking forward to this enormously. There's a great excitement about a first ever release of a picture, wherever it is. And it takes me back to Royal Command film performances in Leicester Square, and I've attended quite a few of them. King and Queen come, of course, and all the stars are there. And the whole of Leicester Square is filled with people, searchlights, television cameras, and we're going to see something of this in Perth tomorrow night. In fact, I think it's going to be marvellous. The television cameras are going to be there, as you know, and the lights will be there, the limousines drawing up, red carpet out, the governor is coming, and I think with the women beautifully dressed, men in dinner jackets, this is an occasion that, you know, is good for the theatre, and I think it's going to create a lot of interest, and a lot of people will be there.
We had the world premiere April Fool's Day in 1971. But it went very well, and the whole experience really was quite good, and it certainly was very good for Western Australia. The best of the premieres came in Kalgoorlie 4 days later, when you could barely hear anything in the film because they were pointing out people, yelling, jumping up and down, and goodness knows what. That'd be one of the best premieres ever held anywhere in the world.
Despite its lack of critical acclaim, Nickel Queen enjoyed strong popularity amongst local audiences and ran for a record 6 months at Perth's Piccadilly Theatre in Hay Street. Apart from Western Australia, reviews were at best mixed. 50 years after the event, Western Australia is still awaiting a world-class movie studio, though in early June 2021, Labor leader Mark McGowan announced that Victoria Quay, on Fremantle's historic harbourfront, will be the site of a new $100 million state-of-the-art movie studio. The studios will consist of 4 sound stages, offices, construction space, parking, set storage, and other amenities. It's understood the government wants the facility up and running in 2 years. This proposal has attracted much comment, not all of it positive. Time will tell if the state can join the rest of Australia in the rush to build studios and attract big productions. We would greatly appreciate your support in helping us produce more documentaries on our film and television heritage. Please join our Pictures in Motion Film and Television Museum.
That was a Pictures in Motion In Focus presentation.